President Trump has described his meeting with China's President Xi Jinping as amazing, saying that they made a series of outstanding decisions to avert a spiralling trade war. Speaking to reporters on his flight home from South Korea, President Trump said that some tariffs would be reduced and that sales of advanced computer chips to Beijing were on the agenda. In return, President Xi had agreed to lift restrictions on rare earth mineral exports for a year. Now, they're vital for the manufacture of cars, planes and weapons. He also agreed to curb production of the drug fentanyl. Well, here's President Trump speaking to reporters on Air Force One.
I thought it was an amazing meeting. He's a great leader of a very powerful, very strong country, China. And what can I say? We have, it was an outstanding group of decisions, I think, that was made. A lot of decisions were made, too. There wasn't too much left out there.
Donald Trump there. Well, let's cross over to my colleague Steve Lai, who is in Gyeongju. And Steve, the president saying the meeting was amazing, the decisions were outstanding. Just how amazing was it?
Yeah, well, he was asked 1 out of 10 how he would rate the meeting, and he said 12. So that gives you an impression about how he thinks it went. Certainly, he's been very positive about it since he spoke on Air Force One. Those comments that we heard from him were straight after the meeting. When he left the meeting, he went straight into Air Force One and departed South Korea. Now, we have heard more from President Trump. I'll just run you through what he's been saying on social media regarding some of the outcomes of that meeting. He says our farmers will be very happy, saying China will start buying massive amounts of soybeans and sorghum and other farm products, as well as American energy from Alaska. He also says that China has agreed to continue the flow of rare earth materials, as you mentioned, Kasia, and that they will help us end the fentanyl crisis, he says. There is enormous respect between the two countries. Now, just a reminder, China has not confirmed some of the measures mentioned by the US president. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Jake Kwan, our South Korea correspondent, who's been watching developments here with me in Gyeongju. Jake, talk us through some of the responses that we have heard from some of the spokespeople from China with regards to this meeting.
Well, China said that there is now a consensus on a lot of these trade issues, but they have also shared some of the details, largely confirming and echoing what President Trump has told the reporters on the Air Force One, namely that there will be a suspension of the rare earth mineral exports measures that they were going to bring in, which would have effectively throttled the export of these very critical resources for modern manufacturing. This is a critical resource that goes into magnets, as well as any kind of state-of-the-art machinery that would have been critical for President Trump's his goal of revitalizing American manufacturing. So that was the sticking point in this impasse of a trade dispute, and we heard that is going to go away for a year, and we also heard that that there will be an immediate lowering of the American taxes on Chinese imports for 10%, as well as we heard that China is expecting America to suspend for a year this measure that they had against Chinese shipbuilding or anything shipping related industries. So the theme we're hearing here is that all these harsh economic measures that were made to hurt each other's economies will be going away for a year. Now, of course, after a year, we'll have to see if this can become a more permanent solution. I think going into today's meeting, a lot of people are optimistic that there could be some kind of a deal, but nobody was under the impression that this would be the end of the trade war. Instead, it feels more like a truce, and we'll really have to see whether the ink can be put on the paper, which will really be the point where we can say there is an agreement.
Yeah, and trade deals and trade agreements often take time. They're not often negotiated in 90 days, as President Trump had hoped for. Now, President Trump did say that he is expecting to meet with President Xi Jinping next year in April in a trip to China. So the two leaders have spoken. They look like they will be speaking again in times to come. But in terms of the meetings here in Gyeongju at the APEC summit, President Trump has now left South Korea. President Xi Jinping has now arrived. So just quickly, Jake, there's still quite a few more days to go, and President Xi Jinping will have center stage.
Yes, so President Xi Jinping is going to stay here for 3 days at the APEC summit. This is an annual gathering of 21 countries. And President Xi Jinping, his schedule is not all shared with the reporters at this point, but he's expected to deliver some kind of speech on the 31st with the leaders. And this is essentially a stage for him to brush shoulders with all these world leaders to talk about trade as well as perhaps security. Now, what is really notable here is the absence of President Donald Trump. Normally, American president would be attending these meetings, but he chose not to stay for that main event, and instead he has returned to America today. So instead, we'll see the Chinese leader filling that room, being the biggest man in the room, and brushing shoulders with America's traditional allies and other leaders.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jake, for getting us across that. Jake Kwan there, our Seoul correspondent. So, as we mentioned, President Trump has now left. President Xi Jinping now takes center stage here in South Korea. And we can discuss this further with Meredith Crowley. She's a professor of economics at the University of Cambridge. Meredith, positive words as we've seen from both sides. What's your key takeaway from the Trump-Xi meeting?
So this is a détente, which is a big win for the United States substantially and for the high-income West more generally, because China has agreed to allow the continued sale of rare earths. They're obligated to do that under the World Trade Organization. So, that's good. In return, the U.S. is probably going to get, very little in the way of soybean purchases would be my expectation. So there was a trade war. That trade war is still going on. Xi and Trump made it a lot worse in the summer since Trump took office, and now they've dialed things back. The thing the U.S. really wanted was this rare earths policy change. What China wanted was high sophisticated memory chips. So these NVIDIA chips, other kinds of sophisticated technology, they didn't get that. What they got instead was a lot of press time with the American president saying how wonderful President Xi is. Xi can now play that in China. It looks like a win for him domestically. He can sell that as, I stood up to the U.S. and things are looking better for China now.
I just want to welcome our viewers in the UK. If you're just joining us, I'm Steve Lai here in Gwangju, and we are having a discussion with Meredith Crowley about the meetings that have taken place here in South Korea, where President Trump has met with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit. Meredith, just to continue on, what do you see as the biggest challenges or the biggest obstacles between the two big superpowers, the US and China, when it comes to the various issues that they have?
Well, since President Obama was in office, the U.S. has had this kind of dual strategy of a pivot to Asia, wanting to strengthen its trade connections, its investment connections throughout Asia. But at the same time, they wanted to ring fence and contain China and keep China from having a deepening of its trade relationships with other partners in Asia. So if we look at everything that's happened in the last week or so in Asia, Trump has actually achieved in many ways things that President Obama was trying to achieve but wasn't able to deliver on. So, for example, these agreements Trump signed in Malaysia and in Cambodia, they've actually given U.S. tech companies a lot of power with their relationships with these countries. So basically, everyone in the world that's not the U.S. wants to charge digital services taxes on e-commerce, use of Google, advertising by Google, that kind of stuff when it happens within their country. The U.S. doesn't want other countries taxing these big American companies in their own jurisdictions. So they don't want Canada imposing a digital service tax. They got Malaysia and Cambodia to agree not to do that. They also got these commitments that these countries will align with U.S. export controls that are security related. Read, they won't export the rare earths or the mineral chips to China if the U.S. says don't. They also got, the U.S. and Japan had this agreement where they said, very light touch agreement, not substantial commitments, but both the U.S. and Japan are committed to using their own policy tools to reduce their reliance on China for rare earth minerals. This is a big deal because Japan makes the magnets that everyone in the world uses for all kinds of sophisticated technology. Japan has been reducing its reliance on China over the last several years. The U.S. is now sort of doing the same stuff Japan is doing. This past week, the Export-Import Bank of the U.S., which is part of the U.S. federal government, announced new investment initiatives in rare earth mining concerns in Australia. So altogether, Trump is, trying to do very aggressively this contain China strategy, while at the same time shoring up and strengthening these commitments with other democracies in Asia. So I think in some ways he does need some credit for this aggressive stance has delivered some things that any American administration would have found valuable to the state overall.
Meredith, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much for your insight and putting that in perspective for us. Meredith Crowley there, Professor of Economics at the University of Cambridge. So, Kash, as you can see, President Trump's trip to Asia has now come to an end, from Malaysia to Japan to here in South Korea. And now it's Xi Jinping's chance to come in to Korea for the APEC summit to see what deals he can make and what influence he will have on countries in this region.